Amen. Okay, I realize that a couple of you were not here last month, but hopefully you have looked through the materials, and this class here is just an introductory class to help you kind of see how the whole Bible fits together and works together. And I went to Sunday school and church all my life, but it wasn't until this first class when I was in Bible school that I really began to understand how the Bible all fits together and how it is a beautiful puzzle with lots of pieces, 66 pieces, but they all fit together. And so if you haven't been through your material for last month, please go through it again. And you can refer to your syllabus for any assignments and reading that you may need to do. So we had asked you to read in your textbook. Just a moment, Sister Sabrina, have the new ones received their textbook?
Electronically, it would have been in their packet.
Okay, Sister Blessing. Okay, so you should have had a textbook, those of you receiving it electronically, and to read chapter 1. And then we also wanted you to learn the books of the Bible in order, which you just need to do that as an ongoing thing. And then we also asked you to pick one book from the Bible that you would like to do a paper on. This is not due till May, but just any book. Maybe it's a book that is your favorite, or it could be a book that you don't know much about, but you'd like to learn about. And you were given some notes on how to do a paper like this. So has anybody picked a book that you would like to do a paper on for, like I said, the month of May? You have lots of time to do this. Does anybody from Sunderland or Chrissy, do you have a choice of what book you would like to write on?
I do Ruth.
Okay, that's a good one. Ruth. Okay. All right, any from Sunderland have you picked? Anyone in Sunderland, have you picked a book that you would like to do a paper on? And if so, what is it?
Again?
Yes.
Yeah, I've picked Ruth.
You picked Ruth as well. That's good. Okay, Ruth's a popular lady these days. All right. Anyone else there?
You picked one, Lee?
I'm sorry?
Hi, it's Lee.
I'm sorry?
Liz picked Matthew. Is
Matt?
that all right for him to do Matthew?
That's fine. Okay, and what about Kira?
Kira?
Pick a book of the Bible, so one you want to do an essay on for October.
No, this is not till the month of May.
What is May?
Yeah, you have lots of time. That's why I'm just trying to help you get started early.
Yeah, it's another one where we've got everyone done for next month, sorry. Kira wants to do Matthew as well.
That's fine. Okay, so Sandra and Sister Blessing, if you tell me next month, unless you
Yes.
already know.
Yes, I'll tell
But
you
you can
next
tell me next month, all right?
I
And
don't mind. I'll do Ephesians.
Ephesians, okay? That's fine. Now,
Can I
please,
just ask a question?
yes?
You mentioned before, because I wasn't aware that we needed to. I didn't realise it started in August.
I'm sorry?
I didn't realise it started in August. I thought it was now.
Well, Sister Carmen did not have you start now because in August because you had a Central District Ladies' Day.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Right. You said there was something else that we needed to read. Can I just?
Okay, you should have received electronically your book.
Yes, I got it. Which
Okay,
book is it? I've got quite a bit of.
It's for Bible Survey, and you need to read chapter 1.
Bible survey. Thank you.
Okay? Now, the other thing is, and I'll give you another month on this, I had asked you to try to look up online or wherever you'd like to look at the library, any information you can find about the exploration concerning Noah's Ark. So we'll talk more about that next month, But if you can get any information and just submit it and send it to us. If you use either Sister Sabrina's address that you've received materials from or our address, I'll give you our address. It's R. Kelley, Kelley, 608 at AOL.com. R. Kelley, Kelley, 608 at AOL.com. All right? So,
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you properly.
R. Kelley, Kelley, 608 at AOL.com.
And it's the exploration on,
Noah's Ark. It's on your syllabus that you have received for Bible survey. Looks like this. This was given with your August materials. So everything that we will be doing is here on this syllabus, and you can refer to this. All right?
thank you.
Okay. Now, in your materials for last month, we talked about the historical divisions of the Bible. All right? And through the Old Testament, we had what's called the pre-patriarchal period, which means before the patriarchs. Patriarchs means the fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then we had the patriarchal period, which is the lives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Then we had the Egyptian bondage and Exodus period. Then the conquest and judges period. Then the united monarchy. Then the divided monarchy. And then the exile and captivity. All right? We'll just refer to this today, but you should have already received it last month. Today, what we want to look at and talk about are the spiritual divisions of the Bible. Those were the political, the natural, the historical divisions, but we would also like to look at the spiritual divisions of the Bible, and these are called dispensations. Okay, dispensations. This should be on your notes for today, this chart right here that says dispensations. A dispensation is a period of time during which man is tested as to his obedience to some specific revelation of the will of God. Dispensations are the spiritual divisions of the Bible, whereas this other chart was the historical and political divisions. These are the spiritual divisions of the Bible. So it's a period of time to which God gives man a plan of salvation to live by, and it's a time, it can't put a specific date, that each dispensation is a certain length of time, but it is a time during which they have to follow God according to a certain set of instructions and commandments. You'll see in the corner that says each dispensation is a new revelation, a new beginning, a new failure, and a new judgment. All right, so across the top of the chart, you will see diagonally these words. The first one was innocence. The C stands for creation. God created the world, and then the first dispensation was the time of innocence when Adam and Eve were in the garden. They knew no sin, they knew no shame, everything was perfect. God would have liked it to stay that way, but because of their sin of eating the fruit of the tree, they were expelled from the garden. The E stands for expulsion. All right? So that time of innocence was wonderful. There was no sickness, no death, no hardship. Everything was perfect. But because of man's own will, they were expelled from the garden. So then after that was the dispensation of conscience. This is when man lived according to their conscience, according to what was right and wrong. We all have a deep conscience within us to tell us what is right and what is wrong. And this is how man lived. But man became very sinful, And this led us up to the time of the flood. The F stands for flood. This was the judgment that came upon the world because of man's sin. Then we come to the time of human government. And this is after the flood. God told them to disperse on the earth, and then he would, the nations would be populated. But you may remember the story of the Tower of Babel, when they wanted to build a tower to reach to the heavens because man wanted to be like God. And God did not allow that to happen. And so you may remember that at the Tower of Babel, God came down and confused all their languages. So Babel was when this period ended. And when their languages were confused, then they could not work together to build the Tower of Babel, and they spread out over the face of the earth as God had told them to do after the flood. Then we come to a time of promise, okay? And where God was with Israel as they were in Egypt, and he gave them the promise of the promised land. But again, this came to an end with the judgment of the bondage that they were in. They were put into slavery and bondage. Then we come to the dispensation of the law. And the law is what covers much of the Old Testament, where man was given the Ten Commandments and a huge set of laws to live by in order to please God. And we know, and we'll talk much about it in this class, that mankind did not do well living under the law. And so then Christ came, and the cross stands for Calvary. Calvary marked the end of that dispensation, when no longer was man to live by a set of rules alone, but by the grace of God. And that led us into the dispensation that we are now in, the dispensation of grace. And the dispensation of grace encompasses the church age and the day that we are living in now. So grace, the dispensation of grace, will end with the second coming of Jesus Christ, when the Lord comes again and takes his church out of the earth. And then yet to come is the dispensation of the 1,000 years of the millennium. And after that will come what's called the white throne judgment. So we have eternity at the beginning and eternity at the end. But all of these periods of time, from innocence up through the millennium, are what is known as the dispensations. And you can see there at the bottom of the chart the time period, the Bible part that it covers. All right? So this is very important to understand, that during each dispensation, it was a new revelation, a new beginning, a new failure, and a new judgment. You should have a paper that looks like this that says the 7 dispensations. I'd like you to take just 2 or 3 minutes and read this to yourself. It gives you a little bit more insight into it. Yes.
Does it say just add to?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But visual.
Oh, well, yeah, it will. Okay, what's happened is we knocked the others. It usually comes up where you can add. Yeah. Hello?
Good morning.
Good morning. Where is this from?
This is Adrian.
Oh, good morning, Adrian. Okay. All right, you're to connect, you're for the analysis of religion, correct?
I don't know which the assignments are for today.
Are you in year one?
Yes.
Yes, he's to be here all day.
I can't tell. Okay, Adrian, what we need to do is call you back in about 15 seconds, okay?
Yep, no
All right.
problem.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, bring those, yeah, bring them. Let's see what happens. I'll add this, let's see. All right, go. Sorry, folks, we're adding another student. Okay, are you back, Adrian?
Yes, I'm back.
Okay, thank you. You're with the other students. Now, we can't see you yet, but that's fine.
I can see them.
Okay, and can you see the instructor here?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Okay, so
Thank you.
if you have any other questions on dispensations, please, you can let me know. Anybody right now have a question about dispensations, the spiritual divisions of the Bible? All right? Let's go on and look at a paper you have called The Great Value of Genesis. The Great Value of Genesis. And in many respects, it says Genesis is the most important book of the Bible. Okay? Every leading fact, truth, and revelation is found in this book. All right? Genesis is the seed part of the whole Bible, and knowledge of this book is essential to the true understanding of every part of the Bible. The book is the foundation of all Bible truths. All right, Chrissy, could you read point 4 there about the author and origin?
The book was written by Moses. It is more than tradition, as some would say. It was not handed down from Adam to Methuselah to Noah to Shem to Abraham to Isaac to Joseph and finally to Moses, as some would say. Acts chapter 7, verses 37 and 38 leaves no doubt as to the origin of the book. It was received from Moses from God. God can show Moses the past as easily as he can Isaiah the future. The book of Genesis was written in prose, not poetry. This is important. Poetry forms handy clothing for mirth and legend. Genesis was written for history and for fact, not fable.
Okay, so this is very important that we understand that Genesis is fact, it's not fable. Genesis begins the story of how the nation of Israel was developed all the way from the creation of mankind up through the time of Joseph and when they went into slavery in Egypt. All right, so it's a historical account. Its message is the failure of man under every condition met by the salvation of God. It was necessary for man to know by failure his own weakness before he would willingly choose God. Amidst an ideal environment in the Garden of Eden, and then under the rule of conscience from the fall to the deluge. The deluge just means the flood. All right? So this is all the way from the Garden of Eden. As I said, everything was perfect in the Garden of Eden. No sickness, no toil, no labor, no weeds in the garden. Everything was wonderful. And they had so many positives, but they focused on the one negative, which was do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But because they sinned, they were taken out of that perfect situation, and from that point on, mankind had to work for a living, he had to farm the ground, he had sickness, he had death. All of these negative things came into mankind. All right, could we have Sandra, could you read the two books the devil hates, Genesis and Revelation? Do you have it?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, the devil hates Genesis because it gives the true beginning of man, and also because in it we see the fallen angel, and also a prophecy that speaks of no further judgment upon him. The devil hates Revelation because it discloses the judgment, and also because it prophesies about his downfall. Genesis tells us who will bring this about, and Revelation gives the details of its execution. The devil has tried to overthrow Genesis by scientists and other critics. Men have been making a monkey out of themselves, trying to prove that man came from a monkey. The devil attempts to destroy Revelation by persuading men that Revelation is too mysterious to understand.
Okay.
Amen.
So, two books the devil hates. Now, there may be a couple handouts in there we won't go over in class, but you can just read them on your own. We have a paper with a chart like this called Genesis. You take a look at that. Genesis begins in the beginning. Its 50 chapters sketch human history from creation to Babel, chapters 1 to 11, from Abraham to Joseph, chapters 12 to 50. The first 11 chapters introduce the Creator God and the beginning of life, sin, judgment, family, worship, and salvation. The remainder of the book focuses on the lives of the four patriarchs. Remember, patriarchs means the fathers: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph, from whom will come the nation Israel and ultimately the Savior, Jesus Christ. All right? So, then you have a chart there kind of going over the things that I have just said. All right? So that just gives you a little visual as to how the book is broken down, chapter by chapter by chapter. All right? Now, also you have a paper that looks like this, the Genesis, the Book of Beginnings. Okay? Let's take a look at Genesis, the Book of Beginnings. So again, here's just another breakdown for you to understand. From the creation, chapters 1 and 2, the fall, chapters 3 and 4, the flood, 5 to 9, nations, 10 to 11, Abraham, 12 to 25, Jacob's 26 to 36, Joseph, 37 to 50. So a total of 2,300 years. So when you hear the term pre-patriarchal, that means from the time before Abraham. Patriarchal means the time of the fathers of the nation, Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and Joseph. All right, so there's 7 words that portray the story of Genesis. And interestingly, you'll find this throughout the Bible, how something factual can also display something spiritual. In creation, we see God's power. In the fall of man, we see God's love and mercy. They could have died physically as well, but God gave them another chance to choose to do what is right. In the flood, we see God's holiness and punishment of sin. In the beginning of nations, we see God's sovereignty. In Abraham, we see God's faithfulness. He's known as the father of the faithful. In Jacob, we see God's grace. And in Joseph, we see God's providence. So this is all very important characteristics of God that we see from what happens in the book of Genesis. All right, now you don't have this paper, but I just want to show you this. This is a map showing us, if we go back to the beginning now, about creation and the Garden of Eden. If you can see from this map that this red circle here is where the Garden of Eden is believed to have been located, which is in present-day Iraq. Okay? That's where the Garden of Eden was located. All right? It was close to what was called Babylon then, but it is present-day Iraq. Now, it may come as a little surprise to you to know that there are different accounts of how the creation happened, even within Christianity. All right? Let me first of all say, of course, we know that many people in education today are being taught evolution. And we know that that is not right. We know that God did create man and all of the earth. There was a scientist one time who went about to try to disprove that God created the world. And he set out on his study to prove this. And at the end of his study, he came to the conclusion that there was no way this could have all just have happened through evolution. And he ended up believing the Genesis record. And this little book is called Why I Accept the Genesis Record, from a scientist who started out to disprove what the Bible said. Here's a little interesting quote. A computer explains creation. In an effort to find out what happened when the earth was formed, scientists spent weeks gathering information and feeding it into a huge computer. Came the great moment. A button was punched. Relays opened and closed. Lights flashed. Bells rang. Finally, a message emerged, and it read, see Genesis 1:1. So even after all the scientific input, they came back to the point of see Genesis 1:1. That's how the creation of the world began. So I think it's pretty interesting, a quote like that, and also a scientist who set out to disprove creation came to believe creation. And of course we know that it is true. Could you take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. And I want to share with you two different theories as to how creation began, even within the realms of Christianity, different beliefs emerging. Now let me just say to you that this is not really a matter of salvation, which theory of creation you begin, and I'm only going to present two to you. I always say it doesn't make hell hotter or heaven shinier as to which theory you believe. But it's interesting to know that there are different means of believing how that the creation happened. So, Sister Blessing, would you read that very first verse?
Okay.
Genesis 1:1.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
All right, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. All right, the first theory I want to share with you, and you might write this in your notes, you don't have a chart for this, but write it in your notes, is called the gap theory, G-A-P, the gap theory of creation. All right, Sister Blessing, would you read verse 2 of chapter 1?
Now the earth proved to be formless and waste, and there was darkness upon the surface of the watery deep, and God's active force was moving to and fro over the surface of the waters.
Okay, so Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Verse 2 says, and the earth was without form and void. So here I have just a simple little diagram. This is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. All was good. But Genesis 1:2 says, and the earth was without form and void. According to the gap theory, something happened between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. All right? And that's what we want to talk about. What happened that the earth was formed and then it was without form and void? It's what you have to look at here is the Hebrew. All right? Genesis 1:2 says the earth was without form and void. All right, turn in your Bibles over to Genesis 19:26. Remember that word was. In the Hebrew, the word was. But let's look at Genesis 19:26. Adrian, do you have that? You could read it to us?
19,
20,
19 to 26 or 26.
chapter 19, just verse 26.
But this his wife looked back from behind him, and she became a pillar of salt.
Okay, this is the story of Lot's wife. Now, the interesting thing, if you would go and study Hebrew, it says she became a pillar of salt. This word for, the Hebrew word for became is the same Hebrew word that's used in Genesis 1 verse 2. The earth was. So was and became are the same Hebrew word. So that makes you wonder, between Genesis 1:1 and 1:2, did the earth become without form and void? That's what this theory is saying. Now this is very important, and I hope you're getting it. If you don't get it, somebody say, I don't get it, okay? So Genesis 1:2 says the earth was without form and void. Genesis 19:26 says Lot's wife became a pillar of salt. Those two words in the Hebrew are interchangeable. All right? So we come to what's called a chaotic earth. You might want to make 3 circles on your paper. You have the original earth in Genesis 1:1, and then Genesis 1:2 you have the chaotic earth. All right? And then we go on after that to Genesis 1 verse 3 all the way to chapter 2 verse 31, and we have the restored earth and the days of creation. Okay? Genesis 1:3 to Genesis 2:31 is the restored earth, when God created the heavens, the earth, the sea, the land, the animals, the plant life, and finally mankind. All right, so why is this important? Have you ever wondered, when did Lucifer fall from heaven? When did the dinosaurs live? I've often wondered that. Well, according to this theory, it very well could have been when the earth was chaotic, is when Lucifer fell, and also it could have been the time of when the dinosaurs lived.